everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is Jack and Kate from Terrain Anthologies, and tonight I will be interviewing our very own Kate on all of her writing and about her and just everything you could want to know. So let's go ahead and get started. So just first off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
As Eli said, I'm Kate. I am a primarily young adult fantasy author. I live in New York with my delightful husband and my rescue dog, Gracie. I've always wanted to be a writer since I was like 5 years old and started writing in little stories and notebooks my mom gave me. So yeah, living the dream.
Living the dream as a writer. What was one of the first stories you ever wrote?
I definitely wrote a story where my little sister was kidnapped. And wow. I rescued her.
Nice.
I'm kind of surprised about that because as a child, I really was not happy to have a little sister at first. I once told my aunt that my mommy told me it was okay to eat as many cookies as I want and to be mean to my little sister. So, but I guess deep down I loved her because I did rescue her when she was kidnapped in one of my very first stories.
That's sweet.
One about a parrot who alerted, I think this was a Lassie throwback, he alerted the children to a giant storm that was going to come and sweep their house away so they could flee in a boat.
Oh, that's awesome.
Parrot Lassie.
Parrot Lassie. I love it. You got to revisit that.
I think my mom still has it, actually. I should be like, Mom, can you send me that Parrot Lassie story so I can revamp that?
Gotta re-up it, make it a sci-fi novel. It'll be great.
Yeah, definitely. Android parrots.
So since you were 5, what got you into writing?
It was just something I always did. Like, I distinctly remember being very young. I don't know exactly how young, maybe like 8, and my mother being like, no, like, you have to stop writing at the table. You need to sit down and eat dinner with the rest of us and have a family conversation. Because I would just sit there and like write little stories. And I was always like a reader. I learned to read pretty young, and I would steal, like I stole the stand from my father's bookshelf when I was like 12. I stole Gone with the Wind from my mother's bookshelf when I was like 11 or 12. So I was always trying to find books wherever I could get them, and I didn't really read to my age group, so I think it got my vocabulary off to a start young.
So I guess with that in mind, because I've been writing since I was little too, so when somebody asks me, oh, what got you into writing, it's like it's just part of my nature. Yeah. So I guess, what was the point in your life when you started looking at other writers and you said, oh, I could do that? Like, what was that moment?
Well, I was like firmly convinced that I could and would do that all through middle school and high school. Mm-hmm. And that is why I went to college for creative writing. Mm-hmm. But in the background, around when you hit college age, you have a lot of noise and people telling you like, this is a completely unrealistic pursuit. You need to like grow up and start focusing on reality and getting a job. It's going to give you benefits. So I actually, around college, kind of drifted away from writing, mm-hmm. even though I was in school for writing, because it didn't seem like a realistic career choice. Mm-hmm. But honestly, my parents would say to me in like high school, like, you just have to remember that not everyone becomes a best-selling author. It's most people have to have another job. And I was like, no, that's not me. I'm going to be an author. That's all I'm going to do. I don't care if I have to starve and live in the gutters of New York City. But to college, you like want money to go out drinking, and you realize starving in the gutters of New York City might not actually be all you thought it was cracked up to be when you were 15. So
yeah.
So I got a great job.
You get a real job, and so fast forward to now when you have actually published a whole novel. How's that feel?
It's amazing, and I wish I would have done it sooner. A lot of it was just like self-doubt, like what seemed so easy when I was young suddenly became like, oh God, like this is something I actually have to like commit to doing. And I'm also working, and trying to keep my house clean for my very, very compulsively clean husband, among other things.
Among
Um,
other.
yeah, so writing became more of like a pastime and less of something that I thought was something I could actually accomplish. And then I actually had a friend who passed away at 40, um, in like September of last year, right before NaNoWriMo. And I was like, you know what? Like, I could die. Like, weird things happen. Like, sometimes people just drop dead. And do I really want to like die being like, all I ever wanted to do was write a book, and instead I became a finance supervisor. And
I'm
I
so,
was like, no. I definitely don't want that to happen. So I
no,
was like, you know what? I'm going to write this book during National Novel Writing Month, and whatever happens with it, but I'm going to do it.
good.
And somehow I didn't. Yeah, I didn't actually think I was going to publish this book. I figured I have a lot of books that are like first drafts that are saved and shoved in files that nothing ever came of them, and a lot even more of books that are half finished shoved in files that nothing ever came of them. So I figured this was just going to be another one of those situations where, all right, I can say I did it, but nothing's going to come of it. But for once in my life, I actually had some follow through, thanks to some guidance from some friends, like, you know, a wonderful woman named Christine Young, who's a great coach if anyone's ever looking for a writing coach. It's actually where I met Eli. So that was definitely a good experience. And yeah, I got my book published.
Hell yeah, you did. So not only did you get one book published, you have now several. So just pushing that, that one out, do you think it just opened up the floodgates? I mean, you've got Red Rain, you've got, oh my
Chips
God,
Maiden.
which one?
Chips Maiden.
Yeah, Ship's Maiden. I don't know why I keep wanting to call it the Sea Witch.
That's an actually cool name, and I should probably write that one, but I haven't yet. Well, I think Building the World kind of served to inspire me to write those other well, Red Rain is a novella, so it's like a prequel, happens before, and then Ships Maiden takes place between books 1 and 2. So I think just having that pre-existing world, you know, I was like, I want more to happen in this world, but I don't want to write book 2 yet because that's daunting. so
Yeah.
so yeah, that kind of like, it gave me that I had an existing universe and ideas for stuff that could happen in the universe. So of course I had to put them on paper.
Yeah, no, that's good. So I didn't do this first of all, but second of all, how dare you? You have such a way with all of your characters, and maybe I'm just used to really long books, but even, and I'm not going to say your book's short because it's not, but even
It is.
just because some of us have to write 100,000 word novels, but even even in that little short glimpse that we have of the courts, all of your characters are just so full of life, and all their dynamics between each other are perfect. I want to know where you got the idea for Arionette and her plight.
Arionette is a lot me. In fact, I would go so far as to say every single character in that book has like an aspect of me, whether I exaggerate it in the book or mute it in the book. There's definitely elements of me in all the characters, but Arionette is probably the most me. I actually named and based her on a role-playing character that I used for like 17 years in a text-based RPG. So I knew her before I even got started. Like even the parts of her that aren't me that I like pulled from other places, I had that character like firmly condensed in my head after 17 years of playing that character.
Awesome.
So I think that helped because I knew her, like, and I think that's the most important part in writing characters who people identify with and connections that seem realistic is knowing your characters and knowing how they would act in a given situation and what the responses would be. So
Yeah, and that's what made her really real and jump out at me, right? Is just the fact that she wasn't perfect, at some point she may have been, oh, I'm a distressed maiden in this terrifying land, but like she gets up and really starts to kick ass, in the second part of the novel, and it's just perfect. So if you guys haven't read it, go read The Wood Witch's Daughter. That's a shout out.
You guys, so you can see it because I love my cover. I had Danielle Doolittle from Do L Designs make it.
It was a very beautiful cover.
So pretty. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Like she said, go read it.
Yep, go read it for sure. And speaking of, how's book 2 coming?
Well, I'm almost 26,000 words into it. My goal is to be finished with the first draft by the end of August. It might creep over into September because I think it's actually going to wind up being a longer book. I think The Wood Witch's Daughter was 56,000 words. I think this one is probably going to wind up being closer to like 75,000 words because at the end of book 1, the characters kind of get tossed to the wind. So you start book 2 with people in different places, and I followed like 4 different characters threads in book 2. So
Nice.
There's a little more weaving involved, and you can't really wind it up as quickly as I could in book 1, where basically, I mean, you jumped into other people's heads for chapters and whatnot, but they were all basically together, except for maybe Morgane.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was basically two threads you had to follow. Thread from the Broken Lands and the thread from the Sky Court. But now it's like 4. So
yeah,
maybe a little longer. It might take me a little longer, but I still plan to have it done and published by November 1st.
Hold you to it. Hold your feet.
I'm sure you will.
November 1st. Let's go. Let's do this.
Who paid for my Kickstarter? We're waiting for their copies in November.
No, you're good. Speaking of Kickstarter, it's a good way to get. So I haven't personally done a Kickstarter yet, but I know it's been a great way for up and coming artists and writers and authors to kind of get their foot in the door. So you just did a successful Kickstarter, which is amazing. Tell me how that process went.
I was really surprised. I actually thought that like everyone was basically going to ignore it and be like, oh, whatever, she can like make her own money to write her book. But people weren't. And like I actually wound up with like person from Spain. Like I did like I offered books, obviously, like signed copies, paperbacks, hardcovers, and some swag. And I just posted on Instagram and Twitter, Facebook. I did sign up for one marketing package, which was through like the Doctor Who website. They actually sent me an email and they're like, look, we saw your Kickstarter and we think we get the kind of traffic on our website that is going to be really interested in this. And that actually got me over the hump because I was stuck at like, I don't remember, $412 or something like that. Like, and I was like, all I have to do is get to 500. Like, just need a little more. And yeah, it's up to $750 now, and there's 10 days left. It's not an enormous amount of money, but that covers my cover art,
Mm-hmm.
all that marketing stuff that you have to do for a book. Yeah, so
it doesn't just sell itself, even though it should.
No, unfortunately, they do not just sell themselves. It'd be nice if you could just say, hey, my book's out here, and everyone ran off and bought it. But unless you're like, I don't know, one of those really famous people like Anne Rice or Stephen King, that doesn't happen. So one day my books will sell themselves, but not today.
That's okay. We're making our way up there, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about some of your favorite authors. Speaking of books that sell themselves.
Yeah, speaking of books that sell themselves, these are authors who I will buy every single book they ever write. First and foremost is Sarah J. Maas. She wrote A Quarter of Thorns and Roses. That's actually probably, I have a tie for my favorite book series, but that is one of them. That's also fae-based. In case you haven't noticed, based on my fairy attire, and the fact that my book is about fairies, I am very into fairies.
That's beautiful.
And Sarah J. Maas wrote an amazing fairy series. Laini Taylor who wrote Daughter of Smoke and Bone, which is actually more of like a angels versus demons kind of thing. But when you read her writing, it's like you are in a fairy tale. Like she writes like I can only dream of writing. Every word is just evokes that sense of like mystique and magic. So Laini Taylor, Sarah J. Maas, and probably Holly Black. She's another fairy writer. She wrote The Cruel Prince. I really like her dynamics between characters. Carden actually kind of was one of the inspirations behind Varric. I didn't want to make him exactly like Carden, but I wanted that kind of like misunderstood bad boy, like seems really callous, but deep inside might not be. I don't know. You'll have to wait until book 2 to see. But yeah, so those are probably my top 3.
Awesome. Very cool. And then speaking of making characters that I love that you constantly torment. So we sprint a lot in our little Discord, and I often wonder what goes on behind like the scenes and how everybody else writes, because you know when I start sprinting, I'll put on my headphones and just what kind of weird writing quirks do you have?
Well, first of all, and people are going to be horrified by this, especially purists, I do almost all of my first draft writing on either my phone or my tablet.
Oh, wow.
I text, I don't type. I swipe my stories into existence. I move them over to my computer when it's time to edit because it's not really feasible to edit on a phone. I've learned it just doesn't work that well. But first drafts, I always write on my phone, and I actually tend to write my scenes in OneNote. Okay. And then paste them because I don't write in order. I'm one of those people who writes like whatever scene pops into their head and then kind of like mushes them together like somewhere in the drafting process. Like it will stop in the middle of nowhere and I'm like, oh, like I left out like 3 days of scenes here that I have to fill in now. So yeah, I do a lot of my writing in OneNote and then I paste them into a Google Doc where I think they're going to be, even though by the second draft they are nowhere near where they started. Mm-hmm. So I'm a very, and that brings to mind the point of process, which is kind of like what you're saying. And I think a lot of people don't really know or trust their process. Like as a creative writing major, I was kind of taught like you have to outline your stories, you have to know where you're going, you have to have your foreshadowing in place as you write them. And that kind of like crushed me creatively for like 15 years after college because I was trying to use that methodical, this is how you write a book or this is how you write a story. Right. And that doesn't work for me. I have to just write the scenes. I get these visions in my head of how I want them to look, and I just have to write them down and then cobble them together after the fact. So it's really important, I think, for new writers and young writers to learn like outlining and all that stuff, because maybe that is your process, but don't feel like you're doing it wrong if that process doesn't work for you, because everyone's process is different. Yeah.
I don't really have a process. I just sort of write.
I wouldn't really call mine a process. it's basically just writing.
You're like Tony.
But people are like, what do you mean you wrote like chapters 1 and 9 and 17 and you don't have anything in the middle? And I'm like, well, I wrote chapters 1 and then I was like, oh, like what would happen if they were off in a boat? So I jumped to chapter 9 and put them on a boat. Like,
oh, yeah.
That's how
Where is that boat now, Kate?
That boat is actually at the bottom of the phantasmal sea. Half of it is, the other half is no longer in existence.
Horrifying.
So they're not on the boat anymore.
Well, at least they're not on the boat. At least they got off the boat.
They did get off the boat. They're in the sea court.
I don't know if I like that anymore. So I like the advice that you give to writers because I feel like, especially new writers, because there's a lot of gatekeeping in the community. You have to write it this way. You have to write it that way. What's something else that you would want a new writer just starting out to know?
I've read a lot of things about writing for a market or a niche. Mm-hmm. And I think that's basically bullshit. I don't think people should write for a market.
What does that entail?
Maybe, what
Writing?
was that?
What is that? What does that entail? Writing for a market?
Sometimes like following the trends of like what's a hot seller and writing around the trends that are popular right now. But I feel like the trends change so quickly that it's almost like chasing the dragon. Like, unless you're really churning out content like super fast, it's hard to keep up with. And also, I feel like you're creatively limiting yourself if you're writing what you think other people want to read based on what's popular right now. Whereas if you're writing what the story that feels to you like it's the story you need to be telling, I think you're going to have an easier time with it. I think it's going to come out better. And just because it's not necessarily the in thing right now doesn't mean it won't be in 6 months or 2 years or whatever. Like fairies were definitely not in at all when I first started writing about fairies when I was like 17. Like you couldn't find fairy books. Like now there's like Sarah J. Maas and all these big fairy authors. It wasn't really a thing back then.
Yeah.
You never know what's in zombies. I was into zombies way before zombies were ever a thing. And then all of a sudden it was like Walking Dead. And I was like, dude, I was on this like 25 years ago. We're so behind.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, things become trends. So I don't really see the point in writing to a trend. I think writers should just write the stories that are in their hearts and not the stories that they think are going to sell.
I like that. No, it's good. All right. And the very last thing I had to ask was, what is in store for you? I know you're working on book 2, but what's beyond?
Well, this was originally going to be a trilogy, but I feel like it might wind up being 4 books. I don't know. It depends how quickly I can wrap it up. Basically, it depends how many people I kill, is what that really means. So,
Oh, no.
we'll have to see what happens in book 2 and 3. Who comes out at the end? As we said, I don't plan, so I have no idea who's going to die. So I'll be like, someone will be dead one day, and then the next day I'm like, maybe we'll just pretend she was dead and she'll reappear again. But yeah, as you know, because you're watching this channel, I am really excited to be part of Trina Anthologies, and we've got some really awesome stuff coming out that I am really thrilled to be working on, like the mystical, mysterious tarot project. Yeah, and just finishing the series. And then I started a Dragon Shifter series because I have plenty of time to write books with my day job and all.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe I'll dive into that when I finish this series.
Well, that's good.
Or maybe I'll torture everyone and take a break before book 3 and write book 1 of my Dragon Shifter series. I don't know. We'll see.
You should. I bet somebody can make you a real cool cover for it. And then you'll have to write it.
I don't know if I know any good cover artists.
Neither do I. That's okay.
Jack person's pretty okay at them.
Thank you for coming out this evening to your own.
With me.
All right. Thank you for joining us for our, what was this, our 3rd interview. And be sure to tune in to our channel in the next couple of weeks. We will be reading some stuff out of our own book. Kate will be reading from out of New York City, which she has already done, so she won't be doing that. She'll be reading Scylla, maybe a little bit. Yep. I'll read some Flash 19. We'll all read our stories. Shauna is absolutely thrilled to read her story, Unrequited.
Can't wait. And she's excited to do her interview too. Shauna has got so many great things she's really excited about coming down the pipe. As you can tell, I don't mind interviews.
Well,
I don't like large crowds, but I don't mind talking to people one-on-one on a computer screen.
That's true. That's true. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.